One of the things Christianity has struggled with for years is this book, the Bible. It's big, it's boring, it's outdated. Let's be honest, most people these days don't want to read it. It's no surprise then that Christians have tried to add a bit of razzle-dazzle to their ancient tome. There have been plenty of movies over the years to adapt key parts of the Bible, like the Ten Commandments, or the Prince of Egypt, or the Passion of the Christ. But if you really want to reach the modern youth, what you really need is a video game. Answer: I Am Jesus Christ, a video game that borders on blasphemy just from the title. There have been other religious video games over the years, but it's the only one I have heard of where you play as Jesus himself. One look at this trailer and I knew I needed to play it. As a former Christian and Sunday school teacher and current atheist, the concept sounded insane. I didn't even plan on making this game, but after playing it, it was crazier than I could have imagined, so I had to talk about it. So, come with me as I examine a game audacious enough to tackle the Messiah himself. Okay, so right up front, I want to emphasize that I am an atheist, and that is the perspective I'll be approaching this video from. I have a lot of background knowledge from my previous life as a Christian, but basically I don't believe that any of this stuff happened. And to be clear, I'm not going to be mean about it, but I'm also not going to sugarcoat my perspective. If that bothers you, this video might not be for you. My first question as I was getting into this game is what the tone would be. Was this game just going to be one big joke? A meme game like Goat Simulator or I Am Bread? Well, I'm surprised to say that from everything I have seen in the game and gathered in my research, this game was a genuine effort to adapt the Christian Bible. The developers, Playway, have released a lot of simulation games that I have never heard of, but they've been talking about this idea since 2019. Originally, they planned to make an animated movie about Jesus, but somewhere along the way, they got a bit more ambitious. So, what is I Am Jesus? Well, even that is weird. It's an open-world adventure game where you play as Jesus Christ, Son of Man, King of the Jews, the Prince of Peace, the Lamb of God, the Messiah prophesied in the Old Testament, the way, the truth, and the light. The game begins at the most logical possible point, the beginning of time. It starts off by reciting a bit of Genesis at us, and boy does the game love reading the Bible to us. In fact, here's their favorite framing device, the Bible itself, laid out on this table on a bit of tapestry. The game will frequently cut away to this very literal Bible, with one side of the book containing the words and the other depicting the scene being described. And this ends up being very redundant as the game goes on, often repeating events that we have just experienced, as if the game was worried if they didn't give you the literal biblical text they would be smited. Smoked? Whatever. The game runs us through the Christmas story in brief to explain Jesus' birth before...
Jesus, your time has come at last, unbeloved child of God Almighty.
An angel appears to announce that it's time for Jesus to go do Jesus stuff. The game kind of has to start here, since apparently no one bothered to write down anything about the first 30 years of the literal savior of humanity's life. Personally, I think they should have adapted the story where Jesus gets left at the temple as a child to show what great parents Mary and Joseph are. I should also say I'm really disappointed by this angel. It's very classical, a glowing humanoid with white robes and wings. I much prefer my angels to be biblically accurate. Make it creepy, make it weird, I'm here for it. This boring, unnamed angel tasks us with finding John the Baptist and peaces out, leaving us with our first quest. And yep, we're Jesus, lying in bed like a normal dude. First-person Jesus action. Something about that is just really bizarre. Interestingly, even though Jesus has been depicted in movies plenty of times, in this game they rarely show his face, because clearly that would be going too far. They drop us right into his life, into his home in fact. This is one of the more striking things about this game, the attempt to depict ancient Judea. And I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but clearly effort went into building cities that feel authentic to the period. There is a lot of brick and masonry, buildings with wood timbers, intricate tapestries, vegetables drying on the wall. I have no idea if any of this is accurate, but it does feel appropriately rustic for the setting. In general, I find the world of this game fascinating because it attempts to depict a rendition of 1st century Judea, Samaria, and Galilee. You could, if you wanted, walk the entire length of this map, across rolling hills, deserts, villages. I found myself struck by the experience of walking along these trails, realizing that these were real places that still exist. places that hold so much history. I could, with enough motivation, travel there myself and experience this landscape in person. I found myself thinking about the millennia of people who had lived in this part of the world, living lives that we know so little about, and it was fascinating. I found that genuinely arresting, and if this game succeeds anywhere, it is here, presenting a world real enough to give these stories a sense of place you would never get from reading the Bible. That book is notoriously bad about providing background details, and I believe that's one of the things that makes the Bible so hard to get into. The writing all feels so weird, just stiff and stilted. There are almost no details about the people or the setting to help you get a grasp of what life would feel like in that time and place. And while there's a lot of places this game makes some very weird choices, in that one place I think the game is very successful. But okay, we're Jesus and we have a quest. The game definitely doesn't want you to forget that because your active quest never leaves the corner of your screen. The game also gives you a waypoint at all times, so you spend the entire game following it around from place to place. Although, honestly, I guess in this instance that makes sense. We'll just say that Jesus is following his Father's will at all times. Although, canonically, he hasn't yet been inhabited by the Holy Spirit, so it might be more biblically accurate if we only got waypoints after that. But we'll see how this game feels about lore accuracy as we go along. Right now, though, we need to find Jesus' earthly father, and that leads us to one of the game's biggest weaknesses. The character models are ugly as hell. This is ancient Israel, so I suppose they wouldn't be supermodels, but Joseph's eyes are staring straight into my soul. Isn't that God's job? The developers also opted to use AI voices for all characters, and it's not good.
That is truly something, my son. May the Lord be with you. I don't know where John is.
I'm against replacing voice actors with AI in general, but the implementation here is particularly distracting. This is especially noticeable once we get to the disciples. Some of the voices do not fit the characters at all. They all sound a bit too modern, and I found it constantly jarring.
But Master, how will we decide who should go where?
We'll go. I'll take their questions, and you, brother, will take their hearts.
I will go, Lord. I'll start with my own house, invite tax collectors and those others avoid. I want mercy to be the first sign they see.
Anyway, this first chunk of the game is all about finding John the Baptist, and they've really taken some liberties here. There's this whole daisy chain of people we need to talk to track the man down, eventually leading us to the marketplace. Here, we can question some locals and find out the Romans are in town, and those guys are dicks. I actually really like that they invented this bit to show the Romans having a negative presence in the lives of the Jews. That's just not something they talk about much in the Bible, which is kind of weird when you think about it. Most of this game copies the Bible pretty directly, so the moments where they diverge and invent new content really stand out. Okay, we need to track down the oppressed merchant, which means we get to unlock our first Jesus power. Divine Sight! Yep, that's right, Jesus gets powers in this game. This one is basically Batman's detective vision, which lets us identify important items and, more importantly, track this guy down, who is just hanging out on this bench. I really hope these guys aren't planning on rebelling with tactics like that. Okay, let's get through the next steps, because this is a little convoluted and drawn out.
Can I
It
help
mostly
you?
involves talking to more people until we get pointed to the river where John is baptizing people. We head down into the reeds to meet John and get baptized in first person. As someone who has actually been baptized before, this is a surreal experience in a video game. And after the baptism, we get whisked away into the sky. We arrive at a platform suspended above an endless ocean, and our mission is experience enlightenment. So, keeping the task very simple for the beginning of the game. Then again, at the end of the game, we need to save the world from all sin, so I guess we can't be slacking off now. This is the spiritual oasis, a weird metaphysical realm that Jesus visits to get new superpowers. I must have missed that part of Luke. We'll visit this plane a few times in the game, and each time we'll need to do little Bible puzzles to prove our worthiness. This kind of works. I mean, it's like Jesus has to prove his knowledge of his Father's word in order to get new powers. I can almost see what they're going for here, but it just feels really silly. It's just so concrete and mechanical that it emphasizes you are playing a video game. I mean, theoretically, Jesus would gain powers by growing his relationship with God, right? I suppose I have no idea how you would depict that in the video game, but I don't think they even tried here. Instead, we're doing things like identifying the Ten Commandments or matching items with the biblical figures they are related to. It's all just so silly. In any case, now that we've done that, Jesus has a faith meter that goes up when he prays. Yeah, that's how it works, right? I must have just not prayed enough. Theoretically, this meter is what powers Jesus' miracles, but it doesn't really come into play until much later on. For now, we need to rest and talk to John's disciples, which is the perfect opportunity to talk about corn. Why is there corn in this game? That is very much a New World food. Did the devs just not research this? Did they not care? And this is not an isolated incident either. I also managed to find watermelons and peppers and what I can only assume are tomatoes? Worse, where are the foods you would expect to find? Dates and figs would be good. I did find a pomegranate at one point. I know I talked about accuracy a minute ago and said I wasn't the expert, but this really took me out of things and made me question pretty much everything else I saw. Okay, if you know your Bible, you know it's time for Jesus to wander into the desert to be tempted by the devil, so let's follow the holy nightlight into the wilderness. There's a lot of walking here, but eventually we find a cave, and inside are some rather large snakes and a mysterious and very ugly cloaked figure. I thought Satan was supposed to be beautiful and enthralling. Or was that Lucifer? I don't know. Modern Christians kind of combine them anyway.
It doesn't matter, but I've heard that you are his son.
This Voldemort knockoff tries to tempt us, but we resist him with the power of minigames. We just need to guide our light along this snake-shaped path and flee Satan. Again, this is such a weird video gamey mechanic. We're going to be seeing a lot of this minigame, and it never really changes, so get more complicated. It isn't until we're on our way to the third temptation that we get some actually interesting visuals with these massive snakes crawling along through the cave. This manages to feel actually kinda creepy, a sort of eldritch god feel that adds a bit of actual flavor to the visuals. From here, we head into a temple, and this feels even more bizarre and dreamlike. Here, it feels like the game is actually trying to go for something interesting, but things are about to get even weirder. It's time to introduce spiritual warfare. So we get attacked by demons who can't seem to hurt Jesus, but do dash around to taunt you? Jesus can stun them with his holy power and drag them back to hell. As a former Christian, I can tell you that this is absolutely what spiritual warfare looks like. Trust me on this one. Anyway, we've defeated Satan for now, but he's got a whole monologue to give us about how he's going to spread darkness and corruption. I guess they wanted us to know that the literal devil is the bad guy. But yeah, now that we have successfully resisted Satan, we unlock fast travel, Jesus' most important power. And thank God, walking everywhere in this game would take forever. But before we do anything else, I saw a Pharisee and I had to see what that was about.
Would you like to solve an intriguing mental puzzle?
If you're familiar with the Bible, you know that these are the super religious Jewish folk in charge of studying the Torah and the law. These guys are the ultimate pedantic assholes, and in the Gospels they were constantly hounding Jesus and trying to trip him up with difficult questions. So let's see what questions they have for us in the game.
Who tricked his father Isaac into giving him the blessing meant for his brother?
Ah, I see. It's just random Bible trivia. Well, that's disappointing. Well, anyway, time to do our first miracle. We just need to go to Cana for a wedding. And actually, something always bothered me about this story. What did Mary expect Jesus to do? Like, did she know he could turn water into wine? Did she just want him to head down to the corner store? It legitimately makes no sense to me. But in any case, one quick trip to the Miracle Oasis and we get the power of Transfiguration, which of course we select from a radial menu, just as God intended. With a few more clicks, we have magically transformed water into wine and performed a miracle. This is a little underwhelming. And unfortunately, it's not like we can just transfigure anything we want in this game. Okay, now is a good time to look at our menu. The map we've already looked at. The journal just tracks our quests, but those are already shown on our screen anyway. The codex is literally just Bible verses you have encountered in the game. But this tab, the followers, now this is a little interesting. It tracks your performance along a series of metrics like miracles performed, quests completed, and apostles gathered. Getting to each tier will unlock more followers, which are tracked on the main screen. This is, again, a weirdly mechanical way to track this. A lot of this game feels like this, heavy on mechanics and not very organic. This feels really at odds with Christianity in general, which is much more likely to traffic in vagaries, metaphor, and implication. You know, soft magic of feelings and emotions versus the hard magic of a literal checklist. That is a contrast that this game is not equipped to tackle. From here, we're off to recruit the apostles, who are tracked on this tree diagram, for some reason. So this part of the game is more open as we travel around Judea and perform missions to convince them we are the one true God.
Master, what are you doing here?
How hard could that be? I'm not going to cover all of this, but we will look at some highlights. For example, this very random fishing minigame when we are recruiting the fishermen. And Jesus said unto them, "Cast your nets to the other side," and then led the fish to the nets with a light? And look, I know they wanted to add some gameplay into this video game, but this is so weird. Later on, we get to travel to the temple in Jerusalem, a building which has in no way caused any conflict at all. Here, we get to act out the scene where Jesus trashes the temple, and I have to say, this is just legitimately a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong, it's goofy, but I love the way Jesus just pushes over these tables and unleashes the animals. It was my favorite part of the game. Like, look, it's also a little surreal because this game is uncanny in a lot of ways, but that really just adds to the charm. Jesus needs to lose some heat, so he has to travel to this rooftop hideout. There's actually a weird, almost puzzle thing where you have to navigate your way up there. And of course, you meet Nicodemus. We gotta get those Bible moments in there. And then there's the part where we have to convince these disciples to join us by doing their work for them. This leads into an extremely weird minigame where Jesus has to build a house. Tangent time! Most people would say that Jesus is a carpenter, but as it turns out, the Greek word used to describe him in the Bible could be more properly be translated as builder. So it's possible he worked with brick just as much as wood in real life. I mean, I say real life, but I don't believe any of this happened. Anyway, we built a house. So, with minigames completed and the disciples gathered, now is a good time to step back and take a look at the structure of this game as a whole. Functionally, this game is a lot of traveling to waypoints and talking to people there.
I was just about to send someone to find you.
Occasionally, you will need to do a minigame to perform a miracle. This game tries to be very faithful to the canonical stories of the Bible and is rarely creative in how they adapt them. Most of the dialogue is taken directly from the Bible, and I gather that was pretty much the goal of the developers, to put the content of the Bible into a more palatable context. I'd have to say that's a mixed success. I do think there is something to the sense of place you get by wandering around ancient Judah, but the actual tasks the game asks you to perform are repetitive. The game often lapses into just reading the Bible at you, sometimes repeating scenes you have already acted out so they can be sure to get the exact wording in. I actually thought about looking up which version of the Bible they used and which Gospels they pulled their text from, but I just couldn't be bothered. If this game was meant to serve as a legitimate depiction of the Bible, as a way to present gospel to a generation with a short attention span, well, it's just too goofy for that.
Rabbi, I remember. Though during your extraordinary baptism, we didn't have the chance to get acquainted.
It's really hard to take the AI-voiced apostle seriously, and the framing of the narrative isn't heightened by participating in it in most cases. What insight into the story of Jesus do we get by raising Lazarus from the grave ourselves, for example? Maybe, if the game had used the format to introduce us to Lazarus earlier, it might have meant something. I mean, according to the Gospels, Jesus knew Lazarus. They could have introduced Lazarus into earlier story beats so that when he died, we might actually have felt the loss. That could have been a genuinely interesting change that would make sense in the story and heighten the material a little bit. That's the kind of thing a careful adaptation can do, but this just feels a little slavish and rote. Most of this game is just one story beat after another in a sequence of set pieces the game guides you through. And this is a shame. I may be an atheist, but there is room for real drama in this story. And I just don't think the developers had the vision or skill to bring that to light. Okay, we need to now talk about the most important part of Jesus' life, which is, of course, his death. Let's talk about Easter. This game did actually release the week of Easter this year, so that's funny. The game starts this section by sending us off to get a donkey. Okay, I guess that checks out. I kinda like how the donkey has a walking and running animation. They actually paid attention to his ears here. I feel like a weird amount of time went into just this donkey. It's not like Jesus rides animals in any other part of the game. This sequence does, however, point to one of the game's biggest shortcomings. It just can't handle a crowd. Theoretically, Jesus entering Jerusalem should be a big deal, but the game can't handle that many NPCs at the same time, so it all just feels a bit flaccid. From here, they lead us into the temple. Jesus gets upset about the commerce happening inside again, and we wreck it up one more time. And then it's straight into the Last Supper. And this part is weird. First off, they make Jesus wash the disciples' feet. And this is an interesting philosophical point the Bible is trying to make here, having the literal Son of God serving his disciples. It's meant to be a show of humility, a demonstration of leadership as an act of service. The implementation in this game, well, it's really awkward. First of all, the perspective makes the disciples look extremely weird, and the act of filling the water basin and clicking on the feet to wash them is pretty lame. I see what they were going here for by making you do this. It is an important moment in Christianity. There just isn't anything in the game to give this more context, so it comes off as this really weird minigame. With that done, we need to serve bread to the apostles, and this is weird as well. There's a mechanic here where all the plates are highlighted and you have to click on only the plates in front of an apostle. Why? What is the point? You mess up once, you gotta start over again. What are they trying to get at here? Even weirder, they completely skip serving the wine, which is half of the communion ceremony. Were they just not able to depict alcohol? This is a very weird omission. And then, once you've gone through all this, the game cuts to a Bible retelling of the event. This game has done this plenty of times before, and I've complained about it already, but this time, Jesus is in his underwear. It is so unusual, so random, so unexpected, that it distracts from the entire event. But okay, the Last Supper is over and it's time to head into the Garden of Gethsemane. This is where Jesus prays to his Father before he is betrayed, where he confronts the fate he was prophesied to carry out. So, how is this handled? Why, with a psychedelic vision where Jesus metaphorically fights his fears, of course. First of all, the giant snakes are back, so that's fun. We also have to do some platforming as a leap of faith. Yeah, this really comes out of nowhere. It's not like we did much platforming before in this game. Although, I did jump off the temple earlier to see if angels would come to my rescue, but it turns out Jesus just doesn't take fall damage. Must be one of those powers they didn't tell us about. Back in Jesus' vision, there's also this weird section where we need to walk between these Roman guards and not touch them. This actually turns out to be training for a later event, so stay tuned. And there's also this maze you have to walk through. I guess this is meant to be Jesus struggling with his doubts. Along the way, there are 3 gates he has to pass through that represent the 3 times he has to be freed from the burden placed before him. And in spite of all the cross and nail imagery, I don't think it really captures the horror of what God is asking his own son to go through. Once Jesus makes it through his weird fugue state, Judas stabs him in the back and it's time to face the music. This section of the game is really slow. They reused the mechanic from the dream where Jesus needs to walk between guards and it just goes on and on. Now, the game does attempt to insert story here, having Jesus talk to people about why he betrayed his Lord. There's also a moment where they show Peter denying he knows Jesus.
I do not know this man.
Surely you were with him in the
Get
garden.
out of our town!
Isn't he your master?
No, I was not.
This whole section just goes on for a while as the soldiers drag us through town from one authority figure to the next as we work our way up to Pilate. This scene is a little underwhelming, but of course at its end, Jesus is sentenced to be hung on a cross. Now that whole escort mechanic from earlier is elevated as we are tasked to carry the cross out of the city and up to the hill on Calvary for his execution. I know I've been complaining about this escort section, but this part, I feel like I understand what they were going for here. This was meant to be a grueling experience. It goes on for quite a while, and the weight of the cross makes walking straight difficult. This is where the faith meter actually comes into play, because Jesus will sway from side to side, and touching the Romans will hurt his faith meter. Along the way, Jesus will fall down multiple times, and each time you do it, it is harder to get up. By the end, Jesus is so tired that he can't even rise on his own, and you need the help of your apostle to carry on. I do actually think this section is somewhat effective. The crowd is certainly not as big as it should be, but they are taunting Jesus in his time of torment. There is this palpable sense of inevitability and tragedy at play here. There is actually one moment here where I was genuinely taken aback when Jesus gets hit by a rock and is knocked out. Still, he does manage to make it up the hill. This leads to a very surreal moment where you are nailed to the cross in first person and then raised into place. Experiencing this moment in Jesus' life like this was surprisingly arresting, even in this silly game. So, here we are. on the cross, sentenced to die, and he's not really in the mentality to look on the bright side of life. I wasn't sure what the game was going to ask of us here. There isn't much room for agency, but you can still choose where Jesus is looking. So the game asks us to speak to the man hanging next to you, to look at your mother, and that's about it. Jesus dies upon the cross, just as he did in the Bible. Now, my partner and I were very curious how the game would handle what came next. Once Jesus dies, would we descend into hell and fight Satan? Would we participate in being raised from the dead and appearing before people as the risen God? Nope. All that remains are some cutscenes that lay out the few passages that describe this period. This is really disappointing. For a game striving to depict the entirety of Jesus' life, taking away your agency at the moment of his final triumph feels very weird. Surely it would have made more sense to let us play this part. They could have changed the controls in some way to emphasize his altered state as a being that had transcended death. Imagine if you could walk through walls, if people bowed at your appearance, if the whole world looked different somehow with your new perspective. But alas, it wasn't meant to be. Maybe they just had a different vision for this game. Maybe they didn't have the time or the money to do more. I don't know. I do know that I Am Jesus Christ is a strange game. By all accounts, it is a genuine attempt to depict the life of Jesus in video game form. It does indeed adapt the major canonical events from the Bible, and you experience the whole thing in first person. And yet, the game suffers from an inability to grapple with the meaning behind any of this. As an atheist, I may not believe any of this happened, but there is something compelling about a man struggling with his fate. Exactly this kind of story has been told over and over again throughout history. Men struggling against prophecy and fate. But this game is not capable of grappling with the weight of that responsibility. What we get instead is a rote recitation of events, barely adapted from their source material. Whether through lack of skill or intent, no real attempt is made to adapt the deeper meaning of the text. It's almost as if the game hopes that just reciting the Bible itself will be sufficient. Which, I suppose, is a very Christian perspective. They tend to believe that the Bible should be able to speak for itself. I can, however, say from experience that I do not find the text of the Bible very compelling. I do admit I had a strange reaction to this game, that awareness I mentioned that this was a real place the game was depicting. But I don't think that was about any connection to the Bible. I think that was more of a sense of history that I was feeling. And as I said, I think this is where the game most succeeds, but the actual gameplay is, to be frank, quite silly at times and hard to take seriously. I did wonder as I played what an actual believer of Christ would make of this game, but as it stands, I mostly found the whole thing underwhelming. Entertaining at times, do not get me wrong, but definitely disappointing. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I may have complained, but I had a lot of fun playing this very weird game. If any practicing Christians made it this far, I would legitimately love to hear a Christian perspective on this game. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, I would humbly ask for you to give me a follow. I have a lot more games I want to share and analyze. Nothing makes me happier than sharing the things I love with other people, and especially when they're cool things you might not have heard of before. And my next project promises to be a big one. I am going to look at one of my favorite series of all time, SSX. I'm going to go through these games one by one, play every single one, and I'm going to talk about them and see what makes them work or not work. Spoiler alert, and this will not be a surprise if you've seen some of my older videos, SSX3 is one of my favorite games of all time, so that video is going to be quite long. So do keep an eye out for that. I'll also be covering a bunch of indie games in between as I continue my quest to play more small games this year. And that's it for this video. Thank you again for watching, and see you next time.